make love not warmness, and I make love very well.
This is for, yes, a massage of the, as you see on the box. You see? Oh. For those hard to get at places.
Thank you for the food we're about to receive on the Lord's name.
Hey! What are you doing?
How's your dad?
It's okay. Here you go. Thanks a lot. What's your hunt this time? We're gonna shoot some pigs.
I've been watching them. I have all the photographs. I have all the film, the 8mm film. And then I've got this telescope, you see, and I do this. And it's what I call peep art.
Joe, a homicidal maniac.
Be gentle with me.
Oh, I will, Judy, but not now. We've both had a very exhausting evening, and we're both drained. And
Well, when?
would you wait about 25 minutes?
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Sleazoids, the podcast where we go down the rabbit hole of 20th century genre fare, from the most influential canon classics to the trashiest exploitation films we can get our hands on, and invite you to tag along in helping us create a canon of sleaze. Each week is a double feature grindhouse style where we discuss two films loosely related by subject, genre, actor, filmmaker, or franchise, and at the end of each episode, along with our honorary Sleazoids, which you can become by subscribing on Patreon.
We're talking Isaac Hayes just kicking a whole bunch of ass, so join the sleaze.
We decide on all the official ratings and rankings for every film that we cover. Patreon subscribers also get an honor shout-out and 2 bonus episodes every single month, which we have been doing for over 3 years now.
Yeah.
There's 70, maybe even 80 bonus episodes waiting for you guys if you haven't made the jump yet. And speaking of which, we should give those shout-outs here. We had a lot this week. So thanks to Ross McWilliams, Ziltoid Lives, Peter Faint, Juicer used to be Greg, Daniel Fenner, Dennis Duffy, John Hayes, Stephen Rice, Primrose Path, Kyle Mayers, JP, Merrick Alazi, Lobips.
Okay.
Sorry, man. Bradley Main Guy, and Cody Collins. So thanks so much to you folks. Hope you guys are enjoying all those bonus episodes.
Yes, thank you very much.
Patreon's the one plug for the week. The other plug, as always, is Apple Podcasts. If you guys are listening on Apple Podcasts, and I see the stats, I know that you are right now listening. Scroll down to the bottom right now and give us a good old rating and review down at the bottom. Helps us climb the rank on iTunes and find new listeners that way. And what's the other plug? The last plug, the newer plug, merch. Sleazoids. We have merch. If you guys like the poster art that horror artist Trevor Henderson drew for us for the show, you can get that now pretty much put on anything you want. A mug, a shirt, a hoodie,
Pillows,
a notebook. Someone bought a pillow.
Right.
So if you have any interest in Sleazoids merch, you can find the link in the description or go to sleazoidspodcast.com. But yeah, that's it. That's the intro. Welcome back to another episode. My name, as always, is Josh Lewis, and joining me also, as always, my co-host
Jamie Miller. Welcome back, everybody.
Welcome back to another week. I think bringing up our Excel spreadsheet here. 2 weeks ago would have been the last time you guys would have heard from us, and we would have been talking with special guest horror filmmaker and author Perry Rulland.
Yeah.
Third-time returning guest who, as always, when he appears on our show, he likes to gross out every single one of our listeners.
We go sicko mode for sure.
So last week, you guys got to hear us talk about a little underrated giallo called The House with the Laughing Windows, which, had a little bit of Sergio Martino, a little bit of Lucio Fulci in it, and it had a pretty wild finale involving painters learning the path to living forever via art, but still very corpse-ridden finale. And we also talked about, alongside that, the sort of shot-on-video gore horror film Mermaid in a Manhole.
Oh my
which
God.
involved an artist finding a mermaid in the sewer, bringing her to his apartment as she basically became a giant cancerous boil that explodes colors, and he used those colors to paint a portrait of her.
Yes, a lot of blood and other bodily fluids in that movie. Perhaps too much.
Yeah, a lot of really disgusting textures to describe, and I hope you guys enjoyed listening to all of them.
Listening and watching, yeah.
That's right. But last week, for you guys' bonus episodes, we celebrated some Irish excellence. It was St.
That's
Patrick's Day. And we had to get into the mode of Irish culture in America in the horror genre. So we talked about the first 3 movies in the Leprechaun franchise. Leprechaun, Leprechaun 2, and the direct-to-video sequel, Leprechaun 3, which just had Warwick Davis running around saying naughty limericks and
a lot of them.
Killing various people. Very mixed results franchise, we
Yes,
shall say.
Definitely.
Definitely one of our episodes where we talk about movies we weren't crazy about,
Yep.
but still a sort of interesting little curiosity in the same vein as for anyone who listened to our Christmas episode this year where we did Jack Frost, the Killer Snowman.
Yeah, it's right up that alley for sure. It's in that
Definitely
same
something worth watching once to get an idea of what horror trends were like when the slasher movies ended, and we didn't, between the slasher craze and the more torture porn era of the 2000s. What were they doing? They were doing some
basically
weird shit.
just a bunch of juvenile men making dick jokes with violence. That's essentially what it was.
It was a good time.
Yeah.
But yeah, so again, if you want that episode, that was last week's bonus episode, Sleazoids Podcast .com and patreon.com/Sleazoids Podcast. But yeah, moving on to this week's episode, we have a very special guest joining us, someone who I've been meaning to have on the podcast for a long time and who pitched this double feature. I don't know how long ago, but these 2 movies have been saved for him specifically for at least a year, maybe even longer. We have a friend of the show and host of his own movie podcast that some of our listeners should be familiar with since I've guested on it a couple times, the Extended Clip Podcast. Welcome, Eddie Averill. Eddie, how are you doing?
Hey guys, I am pretty good. I mean, you guys know that's a lie because off mic I told you about how I've had diarrhea all morning.
Yeah.
Other than that, I'm pretty good. Also, I'm really I'm excited to go through those Leprechaun movies as a recent patron, but as a recent patron rather. But I really hope you guys stick with it because I know it seems a little treacherous at first, but I hope that within the next year you can have me back on for a double feature of Leprechaun in the Hood and Leprechaun Back to the Hood. Because I think those are really the films that I should be here to talk about.
Yeah,
I am
definitely.
down 100%.
We also weird that he goes to space before going to the Hood.
I also find
just
it
a weird
strange
turn of
that
events.
it's the only subtitled one because the first 3 are just 1, 2, 3, and then 4 they were like, no, we got to explain that he's going to space. That's got to be in the title.
Yeah.
Well, they were cashing in on that Jason X.
Yes, definitely.
Craziness.
Well, yeah,
but
I
Eddie,
think it's that end of the slasher era. You just have to throw out the numbers and get crazy with the titles.
Yes.
H2O, shit like that.
That's right.
See what you can throw on a poster and what people will go, well, I need to see that. I need to see that little fucking leprechaun fucker
Go to space, baby.
hanging out with the aliens and shit. Yeah. But Eddie, as the show goes, as I'm sure you know, we have the guests bring on the double feature with them. So what 2 films have you brought with you this week, and why did they pair together?
All right, so the double feature is Targets and Hi Mom. Targets, the 1968 film by Peter Bogdanovich, and Hi Mom, ! The 71 film, the early effort by Sleazoid's god, Brian De Palma. Now, I wanted to talk about these because New Hollywood has always been intriguing to me. Early in my cinephilia, I would say, the genre revisionism of New Hollywood was so huge for me. Stuff like Robert Altman's McCabe and Mrs. Miller was just oh, okay, now I understand genre because I couldn't quite grasp the old-timey films, the classic Hollywood ones yet. And now I have a better grasp on those. And, classic Hollywood has kind of become my area of expertise over the last 2 years, or at least my preferred mode of cinema. And so looking back at these new Hollywood classics, it's fun to find ones that were more outliers. I think Targets is not really a revisionist film. It's Peter Bogdanovich wanting to go back. Peter Bogdanovich respects the classic as much as anybody else. And High Mom, I think, is on the other end of the spectrum, where Brian De Palma, a god of pastiche, you've talked about multiple of his Hitchcock riffs on this show, but this is where he's in his kind of Godardian phase of looking outside of his influences and trying to find like a new version of cinema, trying to rebuild kind of this politically conscious and really revolutionary, but also ironic and comedic and brash filmmaking to the forefront before a new Hollywood style was kind of, coalesced around guys like him, Spielberg, Lucas, etc. So yeah, these two movies are just like odds and ends of that movement that I think are just absolute masterpieces too.
Yeah, it's an interesting time period, and these two films especially, I mean, I wouldn't say necessarily they feel forgotten, but they feel like, they aren't as big as, what the what would come out of, people like, again, Spielberg and Scorsese, and what the kind of films that they would make in this period would go on to kind of define it. And so it's interesting to go back and see it sort of like just burgeoning as well, because 1968, obviously, for Targets, it's just like, like we're weirdly like kind of on the precipice. It's a movie that's in conversation with 30s films and 50s films and sort of predicting what 70s films are going to look and feel like in a way.
But you also have the like new Hollywood already setting in, basically. Like if you look at something, there's been a lot of revisionism on this topic, and you look at something like Steven Soderbergh's The Limey. You have Peter Fonda in that movie, an icon of this era. 30 years later, looking back, and he has a great line in that movie where he says, really, it was only 66 and part of 67. And I think that the true hippie energy that was wasted, like used over the next 10 years to such a dreary extent. Like Bogdanovich was already fully aware of that here in 68. Like he's making this film for Roger Corman, and Roger Corman had already made the two films that kind of predated Easy Rider, The Trip and The Wild Angels, and then Easy Rider comes out, and Bogdanovich is just like, no, you got it. You don't get the old movies. Like I get the old movies. Let me show you how it's done through this new style of Corman exploitation style movie making.
Definitely. Well, that being said, I think we're going to just jump right into it here. We are going to start off chronologically here. We are going to begin with Targets.
Takes you for a roller coaster ride through the canyons of a disturbed mind in Targets.
Get out the light! The light! Stay in there, get down! Oh, there's somebody shooting out here! Open the window! Blow your window down! There's a sniper in here!
There's someone going up there. What turns an all-American boy into an all-American killer?
All right, we are talking about Targets, the 1968 American crime thriller film directed, co-written, and co-produced by Peter Bogdanovich. And was this Donovich's debut?
Technically, like he did some cleanup work on another Corman production that got him a directorial credit, but this is his first film.
Wow.
And it's the first Bogdanovich Polly Platt film too. Like that, I think, is really key to point to here. It's gotten a lot of ink already, but obviously the Karina Longworth series on Polly Platt goes into great depths of her contributions to Bogdanovich's films, as well as people like James L. Brooks.
Right. Well, Targets, very loosely, is a kind of dual mode thriller where it kind of tackles two parallel narratives at the same time. One of this sort of aging, on the precipice of retirement actor played by Boris Karloff, who is playing kind of a very loose variation on himself. I read up that Roger Corman, his only sort of the only reason he offered this to Bogdanovich and said that he could make a movie was if one, he included a decent amount of footage from the Boris Karloff, Roger Corman sort of like production failure, The Terror, which was sort of part of his sort of like cheap gothic Edgar Allan Poe updates that he was doing in the 60s, like sort of like The Raven and The Pit and the Pendulum.
Is that what they're watching in the
Price.
beginning, like the introduction?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh,
so
okay.
the opening images is he had to include that.
I thought that was
and the
made
reason
for Targets, so that's interesting.
No, it's a real
I think
movie
it's
that you can watch.
beautiful that like the consequence of the production is like you have to include this much footage. So Bogdanovich just includes it over the opening credits and immediately cuts to Karloff, this godly like movie star from the 30s. As the lights slowly rise in the projection room, he's just like, "This is the worst thing I've ever seen."
Yeah. Wow, that makes that introduction just so much more powerful, because I thought it was built for the movie itself, but the fact that they're actually commenting on a film that was made by Corman, that's very interesting.
Yeah, well, no, the reason he had to include it was because apparently it didn't make enough money for Karloff to get the pay that he was kind of promised.
Okay.
That he was offered like, you know, something like $15,000 if it ended up grossing like $150,000, that he would get like that 10% or whatever.
Okay.
And he didn't get it. So he said, okay, look, what if you film for like 3 more days? We repurpose this footage into another film, and then we make money on that, and then I'll pay you just in advance up front. So that was where Bogdanovich came in, and he said, okay, look, so you only get him for a limited amount of time, which means that, you know, you have to make a story that half the movie is not about Karloff, and you can probably only count on Karloff being in about 20 minutes of your film. And because he's also, at this point too, it's worth noting, Karloff was quite sick as well. I was reading up that you know, he had something called rheumatoid arthritis and emphysema at the same time, and he only had basically like half of one lung working, and he spent most of his time between takes like in a wheelchair wearing an oxygen mask. He could hardly walk. That's why he's mostly using a cane when he's walking in the scenes that he's walking in. So the performance that he's giving here about, you know, sort of like a, you know, an actor who is, you know, sick and tired and kind of at the end of his life and thinking he's going to make one last movie. This actually was Karloff's last movie as well. So they're luckily though, apparently he was able to see the film completed, and also, you know, also see that it was very well received, which was something he wasn't getting kind of like late in his career when Corman, you know, was just trying to use his reputation as an old Universal Monsters actor as kind of like put that name on a poster, update him in some, you know, trashy 60s variation on it. People will come and watch it. Okay. That was kind of what he was doing. And what's so interesting is Bogdanovich, he's handed those real production limitations, and he just turns them into the story of the movie to make them realistic. He just basically made a movie about Karloff in the situation that Karloff is in, which is a very interesting, you know, obviously mode to tackle that in. And then he parallels that with a real deal, you know, sort of like the new wave exploitation of horror, with this focus on this dude named Bobby Thompson, who is just this clean cut kid who is a veteran, and, you know, he's the kind of dude who calls his dad sir. And they say the prayer at the dinner table and everything. Yeah, and
it's painted as like
one day cracks.
The cleanest American suburban family. Like, it's just, you know, that house is spotless the entire time. Just really pretty, bright, like pale blue walls and stuff like that. Like, it's just very, very clean. And it definitely contrasts well to where this movie leads. And so I really
what I love about that is, you know, this is kind of peak counterculture era, and you think like, what is the counterculture rebelling against? And then you go back to those, you know, think about the domestic scenes in like Rebel Without a Cause, and like how the 50s American nuclear family was portrayed. And so here we see in 68, like the rare family that's still like that, and how demented that seems in 1968, you know? And I love how just absolutely horrific this family is. You know, they're watching late night TV together and kissing each other on the mouth to say goodnight at 8 p.m. And it's like David Lynch's Inland Empire, or like the set of Rabbits or something like that. You know, it's this haunted version of the nuclear family that was so promoted in the 50s for America.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it's something that doesn't, you know, quite exist in the same way. And watching this character just crack and essentially go on a mass shooting spree, which is sort of like the other parallel version of the other parallel story that's happening to Karloff's. And you essentially get this portrait of, you know, sort of like this aging, you know, old Hollywood actor being sort of outmoded and replaced by this sort of like, you know, this newer version. He's an actor who comes from an era, and they do it a lot of times in the movie. They even actually have him tell a spooky story at one point, which I really loved. Yeah. But he comes from an era of horror movies when if you were just a 6'5" man who looked kind of funny, they'd put makeup on you, you'd sit in a gothic castle, and they'd tell a scary story, and that scared the shit out of people for a long time. And so what Bogdanovich kind of does here is he's like, what if someone who was part of that production method, who saw that trend, lived long enough that they got to see the era of, you know, someone like a Charles Whitman, who was clearly the basis for the character, the guy who got up in the sniper tower at the University of Texas and just started shooting people at random. You know, that is what people are more afraid of at this point, and that's something that Karloff has to directly wrestle with, is that's something that's way scarier than he ever was. And not only that, what Bogdanovich does takes it even a step further, and then he literally puts Karloff in a movie, an exploitation movie that, you know, capitalizes on those fears that people have of mass shootings. Like the movie we're watching, Targets, is a movie that is exploiting those fears and selling those fears back to people. And Karloff lived long enough to see the exploitation movies that they made out of those fears, which is just, you know, such a crazy thing.
I love how clear Bogdanovich is with it too. Like, you can't miss that message. And if you think it's obvious, it's like, well, watch some other, you know, 90-minute exploitation movies from this era. The messaging will be just as clear, but maybe not as profound. But you have Karloff, you know, telling Bogdanovich at one point, I'm not scary enough anymore. This is what's scary. And he plops down a newspaper with like a headline about a mass shooting. And also have, when Bogdanovich knocks at the door, he even, to quote Poe's The Raven, even says, you know, who's that tapping at my chamber door? And it's like, he knows that his mode of horror is high camp. And his character knows it too. And that complexity is so great, and it's so self-aware, and it almost, you know, we'll talk a little about Godard when we get to the next one, but this actually reminded me of Godard's Contempt. Especially the scenes in the screening room where you have Bogdanovich trying to convince Karloff, and you hear the executives in the background say, did you see that new Antonioni picture? He's a genius.
Yes.
And you know, Bogdanovich, probably not a big fan of Antonioni, and he at this point he's like nursing, or in a couple of years he'll be nursing Orson Welles, who is like the biggest Antonioni hater there is, and you know, maybe he's not hitting the same marks in terms of like a new cinema with new ideas, but he's at least aware that all the great movies have been made, and he has to make these kind of self-aware commentary movies because the raw genre pictures have already been made by guys like Boris and by guys like Howard Hawks.
Yeah, I mean, I love the inclusion of Bogdanovich like in the film as the young hotshot boy director. Like he cast himself in that role of the guy who's, again, you know, wanting to make films with Boris Karloff, and he wrote a brand new script for him, but it just so happens that Boris Karloff, having just sat down and watched The Terror, is like, I'm fucking done. I'm retiring. I'm out of here. I'm an antique. I'm out of date. He says at one point, and I love that Bogdanovich's response to that is like, what are you gonna do? Like, what else do you have? Like 6 months and you'll just blow your fucking brains out.
Friendly talk.
Yeah. Yeah, but
when he first says he's gonna
Karloff
retire,
believes thoroughly. He's like, the world belongs to the young, and make way for them. Let them have it. And Bogdanovich is sort of a representation of what that young artistry kind of looks like. And I love that scene where he sits down and what's the Hawks movie that he's watching?
He's watching The Criminal Code.
Yes, and you just watch him get sucked into the tension of, again, this is a Howard Hawks film, a real Howard Hawks film from 1931 starring Boris Karloff. So they're watching that real film on the television with Boris Karloff using his really intense frame to push this guy through a door frame and then close the door behind him. And it's this very slow moving shot filled with a lot of tension. And you just watch a young Bogdanovich watching this Howard Hawks movie on the TV starring Karloff and just getting sucked in. And his response is, all the good movies have been made. Like, how do I top that? Like, how do you top that? It's over. It's done. And the response is Targets. Targets is the only movie he could come up with, this sort of like meta reflexive idea on, where movies are headed, what the future of movies look like.
And I hate to say it, but I think that's why this is my favorite Bogdanovich movie, is because he gets a little bit of an ego after this and thinks he can make a Howard Hawks movie, which he can't, Like, I love What's Up, Doc, but it's like, that isn't him, making a meta commentary. That's him trying to do Howard Hawks and Looney Tunes together. And I think it like works as like a really great movie, but I think Targets is just so much more complicated because of like, he knows that he's not Howard Hawks in this movie.
Yeah. But I really like Karloff's performance specifically. In here, again, he only shot it over the course of like a couple days. So all of these scenes that he had to do, but Bogdanovich used him really well, because it's the same like the character that Bogdanovich is playing in the film. He clearly wrote this film for where Karloff is in his life. I think at one point he says, there's nobody else from my script because the part is you. And he does the exact same thing to the real life Karloff here. And there's so many great moments where Karloff, he's so excited. He wants to celebrate his freedom from the movie industry. Like after those lights go up and he just hears, the producers like immediately shooting the shit about boring industry insider shit. And he's just like, I'm so done with that. I'm just gonna, live my life. But when he is given the chance to live his life and he's not talking to his assistant or the young director or the producers or the ad guy, because that's what his life is so filled with, it's just complete silence. Like there's a moment when he's talking to his assistant and they go, let's celebrate my freedom. And then he looks out the window and that's it. He's like, his freedom is just that. There's like, what is truly next for him? There's also a great sort of like dolly out shot of him sitting, in his hotel room alone with a dinner for two, just sitting there because he's kind of being a little bit thorny towards his Chinese assistant and kind of pushing all of these people away because his relationships to them are entirely based on his reputation as an actor. They all work for him in some sort of capacity, and he doesn't really want those relationships anymore, but they're the only relationships that he has. So there's a lot of really interesting sort of like pain and soul happening in Karloff's performance, and Bogdanovich gets, in just with the right frame and the right movement, he really just sinks you into that sadness. And then you contrast that with the Bobby Thompson story, which is just absolute fucking like psycho shit.
Well, I think the way he connects the stories is so genius. It's like, it's never too showy, but it's always a clever way to link between. It's almost never just like basic intercutting. It's always these, 10, almost sometimes 15-minute chunks of each story. But then you get something as genius as Boris Karloff saying, make way for the young. And then you cut to another angle of him in the sniper scope. And that's Bobby buying a new rifle. And then there's other ones where it's like, he pans from left to right, away from Bogdanovich and Karloff and into a wall, and then he just continues the pan. And every single time you get these strange transitions that don't call all that much attention to themselves, but it's always a clever way until the story's conversion, the third act, and then he can just cut like nothing between the two stories because they are in the same location.
I also love
that pan is sick when it's panning across him alone looking at his dinner, and then it pans to Bobby alone in the house of with his parents and stuff like that. It's great.
I also love the way that they portray Bobby, because as like absolutely dead-eyed and insane as he kind of does look throughout it, because he just has this almost like it's like a positive kind of attitude he seems to have, but it's still very deadened. Like, it doesn't seem like he's expressing himself all that much, but there's still, normal interactions. Like when he's buying the guns and the ammo, for instance, he's got like a chocolate bar in his hand and he's just eating it nonchalantly, and it just feels very much like almost like a kid picking up candy from a store or something like that. And I
also like that one of the connections is the television. I just remembered that, like, because in Bobby's house, you don't even see what's on the screen. You hear like advertisements for a car dealership, which that's made a big deal of, is like how this whole town is just car dealerships now. And you also like hear them watch a late night show, but then the cut is to them watching The Criminal Code in Boris Karloff's place. And it's like Bogdanovich is like, the images that these normies watch on their television sets aren't dignified enough to show in the cinema because it's just commercial. But we'll let you watch a little bit of The Criminal Code.
Yeah.
Well, and we should also say that too, that it's a really interesting decision to make that the entire soundscape of the film. There's no music in this film.
Yes.
All of the sounds are the radio advertisements or the sort of like the pop music that's playing on the radio stations. And obviously,
I like that it's like
was remarked upon because it was an obvious influence on all those scenes of Brad Pitt driving around L.A. and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Yeah. I love that it's that he's driving. Also, he's driving the American Mustang car, the convertible, the white convertible, and then he's listening to like American classic rock and roll as he's doing it, and that's the only music that you get, and it's Bobby listening to it. So he has this image of like, American freedom and the dream and all that. He's driving the convertible. He's got the blonde hair. He's young. He's looking good. Whatever. But we know he's on his way to murder people. So it's just like it's a completely. It's a very disturbing image that is normally represented as like this, image of freedom and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and this actor Tim O'Kelly, he looks like the kind of kid that would have played like the young cowboy character in like a 50s Western.
For sure. I was surprised to see that this was his only movie. I was like, oh my God, this is the only thing I could see from him. So, yeah.
More than that, he looks like the kid who would be sitting in the front row at a 50s Western. He just looks like the kid who is glued to the TV set, not even the Western movies. He's watching the Western serials where they just kill the Indians every week. He is just glued to the American psyche. And I also love the landscapes that he's driving through, because you have these highways, the freeways rather. And this is a very local film to me. I grew up in the neighborhood where this was filmed. And I still live in that neighborhood. The Reseda Drive-In is something that I wish still existed. But it's very undeveloped. Someone on Twitter brought this up to me, and I thought about that, and it's very funny because they talk about how like it's all just car dealerships now, but really this land was like undeveloped, partial farmland, and a lot of it was used by the movie studios, since all these neighborhoods are like 5-10 miles north of Hollywood. That's where a lot of the fake movie ranches were, so really what they're mourning is just that this useless land, or previously useless land, isn't a fake ranch anymore, and now it's like industry and apartments and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. I do like that he drives past that drive-in a couple times, which is also sort of a way that connects to the Karloff story, because it's where they're going to premiering his film The Terror the next night, and obviously he decides that he doesn't want to be a part of the premiere anymore, where he's invited to stand up there and possibly do like some sort of Q&A or something like that, like at the drive-in premiere. And there's a couple times where you see him driving by it and just looking at the sign, and it gives obviously the story some idea of connecting the two stories, but also that the story is being sort of like taking place in kind of our world, like the fact that he's going to what basically is a Roger Corman movie starring Boris Karloff.
Yeah.
And he's driving by the ads for it and everything like that, while again he's on his way to kill people. And we should get into the sequences that Bogdanovich shoots here, like for example, like the very first sequence where it's kind of hinted at earlier, where he goes target shooting with his dad, and his dad's putting up the cans, and he just instinctively aims down sight at him, and there's this great POV shot of the barrel in the middle of the frame, and his dad shouts, "Hey, that's how accidents happen, sonny boy." Yeah. Like,
sorry.
Yeah. But, after we get a couple scenes of him filming with his parents, and, he's kind of talking, I think he tries to talk to his wife, Eileen, who is living and does sort of like a late night job before she leaves. But before she leaves, before he goes on his killing spree, he sort of, he does that Taxi Driver line, I get funny ideas, that kind of thing. And it's
much
the first
like Taxi
hint
Driver,
that
you have that reveal, kind of like when Travis goes to buy the guns in that movie. But in this one, it's like it's all legit. He's buying them at hunting stores, and that reveal
with his
is
dad's
an
credit
arms dealer.
too.
Yeah, the reveal is just his trunk. Like, oh yeah, he's already been stocking up on hunting rifles and pistols for like so long now.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I love too that, again, the way the fact that Bogdanovich shoots this without music means that it's a lot of sequences of him. I wouldn't go as far as to say that they are like full out procedural, but they stick with him. Like when he buys those guns and he puts them in the back of the car, he drives to the house and he walks up to the front of the house and he enters the house and he's like, "Welcome home. We're gonna have dinner. Like we're gonna talk. We're gonna have this great family get together." And it's this, we follow him in like a tracking shot approaching the house, and we replicate that shot later when he goes out to the car to get the guns, and he opens the trunk and grabs the guns and then brings them inside. And then the next morning, he just goes off.
That shot of when the wife comes in, like slowly walks towards him, and they decide, Bogdanovich decides to have the shot be them getting very close to each other's lips as the morning kiss, and that's when he decides to shoot her in the stomach. Like, it's just so cold and cruel, the way that he does it.
And that close-up of the typewriter typing die right before, too.
Yeah, for real. And just that note itself, like the straightforward, to-the-point way that it's written. It's just like, I'm going to kill my family. There will be many others that are going to die. That's it. Like, it's just like to the point.
I know they will get me, but there will be more killing before I die.
Yeah, just straight to the facts of what he's going to do. There's nothing like there's no motivation or anything. It's just something that's inside him. It's very frightening.
Combined with obviously the very blunt and sudden and ugly way that Bogdanovich shoots that violence. Like, it's just very, they're in this house where there were these sort of like cartoonishly domestic scenes taking place, and then bam, shot in the gut, and then he walks out and he's just executing his mother in the kitchen and the grocery boy.
Yeah.
And honestly, I ended up reading up that apparently there's a lot of writing in this that was actually Sam Fuller, and this was the one part in the movie that kind of reminded me of something that you would see in a Sam Fuller movie.
For sure. Definitely.
Especially like that tracking shot out of like pure efficiency through the hallways there. It's like never a showy one. It's like, I don't know why the adjective that always comes to mind for Sam Fuller's tracking shots are like punchy. Like, it's like it's always just like a violent thing that the camera has to go rush and check out real quick. And then it's never like, look how cool this camera move is. But it's always like the most effective way possible to showcase the violence.
And then after that violence, like where the bodies are just kind of like laying there, or I guess he does start to drag them and put them somewhere. I can't remember where.
Yeah, Bogdanovich does his own creepy version on the Psycho murder cleanup, where he's just picking up the bodies in silence.
He's using
and
the blue paper towels from the 60s or whatever. It's just, I don't know why that's an added touch for me, but it is. But the camera going
I love
through
how
the
he
whole
dirties
house
up the towels and everything.
yeah, and it goes through the entire house and then goes to the note. But it's just he actually lingers in that home for a long time, and once again, there's no music, so you're just sitting there in the empty quietness of this house that just had murder, go
that used to have this family all listening to the television and
having
praying
dinner.
and talking about their days at work and everything like that, and then just suddenly it's this camera just tracking over these corpses that are being dragged across like the bloody floors and stuff like that, and that's the
brutal.
beginning of his killing spree.
Right. Yeah,
the next sequence is him getting in the getting in the car and just, driving down the freeway with all the ammunition he's got loaded up in his car, setting up in a little sniper perch on top of what's, I'm assuming that's like some sort of water tower or something?
Yeah. And
no, that's like an oil tanker.
Oh, okay.
It's like owned by Chevron. Yeah, it's like it's just that's where the trucks get all the gas and bring to the gas station.
And it shows
and
every
like
bit
that land is kind of undeveloped still at that point, and now it's just like full city. That freeway you just are driving over buildings and apartments and stuff like that. But he fully just goes GTA mode on top of that oil tanker, where he just sets up. He's got his snacks, he's got his Pepsi, and he's got his 35 odd whatever rifle, and he's just fucking sniping people as they drive by, watching people react, watching a lady get out of the car, run a little bit, and then sniping her. Just hilarious, honestly. It's brutal.
Yeah, it's insane.
Yeah, I mean,
and I love like the fact that he sets up or he shoots the entire preparation, like him driving, him going all the way up, then him taking out all of the weapons, and he's got like 6 different rifles, and he lays out all his different pistols, and then the last thing he takes out is that cold Pepsi. It's just like the finishing American touch. It's brilliant, really.
Yeah, man. He's got to have his thirst quenched while he's just gunning people down at random. And Bogdanovich too shoots it with a great combination of kind of like these really terrifying low angle shots of him, but then followed by the POV shots of the scope and the shots that he's taking, and then these wides also of the entire area that capture sort of how far he is from the highway as he's taking these shots. And I love too that the way that, because he's picking off moving drivers, it takes so long and a horrifyingly tense amount of time for people to start realizing like what it is that's actually taking place, because he's essentially looking, he's hitting them like you're watching the JFK assassination footage. There's just the cars driving by, he just hits a passenger in the car, and the car just keeps moving.
And you never get a camera angle that's with those people, which is very interesting. It's always his, like what he would see.
Yeah.
So you only really get, like, let's say somebody was shot. You see very often the distance, maybe like a panic or someone falling onto the side of the car or something like that. But you never get like their actual screams or reactions close up. So you only get to see what he's seeing. And that's also very interesting.
Yeah,
and I love
it's
how
worth noting.
Bogdanovich shoots the guy
go
who is going to come like fuck with Bobby, who's working at this oil tanker, the security guard or whatever, because it's like, a hero's call. You see him like looking at some fucking clipboard, and then he looks up like, huh?
Right.
And we get this tracking shot from behind him, kind of mimicking what Bobby did. You get the same angle of him walking up the stairs. And I think that repetition of the shot of the staircase, whether it's, Bobby walking up with his, bag of rifles, or this guy unarmed trying to take him down for whatever reason, because he hears that it's gunfire. I don't know what this dumbass thinks he's going to do unarmed. But, he gets got like you would think. But Bobby gets so nervous, and I love the very quick insert shots of, ammunition or pistols, or food or whatever, like falling from Bobby's hands or off the tower or falling into puddles and stuff like that. I think it's those little moments that punctuate the scene so well that Bogdanovich uses, and it's like he does use quite a few long takes here, but I think those insert shots are what really help build suspense.
Yeah. Well, and there's also an energy to the shots that he's taking because they're from his specific point of view that they're shooting it. And I don't know if you knew this, Eddie, but they actually shot all of that without permits.
Oh,
really?
nice.
Wow.
So yeah,
That's how I'm trying to be. I mean, yeah.
So Bogdanovich had walkie-talkies to communicate with the crew that was on the freeway, telling them when to act like they were shot. But all of the other cars who weren't cast members pretending to get shot were just real cars on the freeway, and so he had to shoot with multiple cameras. One was hit with a wide-angle lens, one had a telephoto lens, and that's what those inserts are.
Yeah.
Are all of these shots of them trying to get these shots before they essentially think that they're gonna, get the cops called on them or something. And the cops were called on them when they got to the part where he shoots the girl outside the car who's running away because someone saw her fall and looked like she got shot, and someone called the cops. And apparently they shut down the crew and they just pieced out before the cops even got there.
So they did what Bobby did.
Yeah, that's exactly. Like essentially the filmmaking conditions were the exact same experience as Bobby's point of view in the sequence, which is kind of amazing.
That's what I always admired about this film is like just as pure inspiration for me. Like growing up in this area and reading about Bogdanovich living in this area and even naming his production company Satakoy Productions. Like, hey, I go to the 7-Eleven on Satakoy like every fucking day, and he's shooting all these locations on the fly and making this fucking eternal classic out of these exploitation conditions, and kind of marking this local area in history in its current state of development in 1968. I think just adds a whole nother layer of beauty and history to this film.
Definitely. And before we do move on from this scene, unless you guys did have more things, I just wanted to include, I love that after he drinks the Pepsi, like he does the big Pepsi chug, he tosses it, and the moment that it smashes to the ground, he cocks the gun and starts. And it's, I don't know, there's this thing where it's like, like lunch is over, I've been fueled, here we go. And it's so fucking dark and very, it's like pretty quickly edited, so it's pretty fast paced. So I just wanted to mention that. That was a cool little touch.
Yeah, well, after that sequence, he decides that he, running from the cops, leaving that sequence, he decides that he is going to Thunderbolt and Lightfoot style. He's going to post up at the drive-in to try and avoid these people out hunting for him. And this is where it gets even crazier in terms of what Bogdanovich is doing with some of the images. And we kind of brought it up when we did our episode with Violet Luca, where we talked about Anguish, because this is very sort of similar idea to what Anguish is doing, even though Anguish, kind of includes a more metaformal device of them watching a movie about a guy who's killing people in a theater while they're being killed off in a theater. But Bogdanovich actually beat them to this idea where they go to the drive-in premiere of The Terror, of Karloff's new horror film. He posts up inside the screen, poking his sniper literally through the Karloff image on the screen.
That shot is
and
so
just starts,
good.
And
just the gun barrel going into the screen.
People off one by one, and all those great shots of kind of like all the cars just like pulling up to the drive-in for a night out. There's these great sort of like loving shots that reminded me of some of the analog fetish stuff that you see in like Blowout, where the projectionist is just setting up the reels. Yeah, exactly. It's very clearly just, there's this love for the mechanical process of putting on the picture show taking place in this drive-in sequence before it is literally interrupted by this, this nihilistic violence. And
exactly, it's a love for it, but it's also like an elegiac thing of like, this is kind of where the good movies go to die. Like you look at something like The Other Side of the Wind, or even Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, they both have the drive-in as this signifier kind of like, the tides are turning in movie culture. But because Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, at least for me, is kind of about how guys like Brad Pitt were kind of the backbone. Like that is how the machine kept rolling was those kind of guys, or at least that's one of the things that you take away from it. And the other side, and he, literally lives behind a drive-in as cinema is dying. And the other side of the wind ends on the same shot that this one ends on, not to get too ahead of ourselves, but the empty drive-in with the light of day coming up, and that image of kind of cinema's death there is just so harrowing and incredible. And I think Bogdanovich absolutely knows what he's doing with that. Like it's such a crazy signifier, the drive-in.
Well, and to so viscerally, sort of depict that as well, with watching all of these sort of like, these smiling faces with their snacks engaging with like this older form of film on the screen, while the more modern exploitation version literally prepares to kill them in the background. and like that is like the source of sort of like tension and atmosphere that Bogdanovich builds is literally built into, those images, the slow pan moving up and down inside the screen as the gunman, starts sticking the gun barrel through the screen, and you see the image projected on the gun barrel and stuff like that. Like it's obviously very obvious, but it's really, really effectively done and doesn't at all sacrifice, like the thriller aspect of the scene that's taking place to get that across.
I also like that he shows how small like the actual hole is. Like he shows him on the platform and then he puts the barrel through the hole, and then he does a wide shot of the entire screen just so that you can get the perspective of the audience. And, the screen is pretty much just entirely full. So they have no idea. And it just adds that extra layer, too, of the something's about to happen. Nobody knows. And it's going to be an incredibly violent, horrible event. I really liked how he just kind of set those shots up. When
he starts executing people in the cars and you're starting to watch the lights go out in the cars,
it's their only defense.
Things like that.
That's the scariest part, is when they get shot and the one family, the wife is just like, just turn the lights off. Like that's the only thing that we can do so that they can't see us at least. Like that's a very scary thing. Yeah. And then also the communication that the drivers start to kind of have with one another, and we spoke about the last shot where it reveals just like also how big that parking lot was. So when they start communicating with each other that something's going on, there's a shooter. It's a very slow moving form of communication at the drive-in, right? Because then they just start like honking. Like so, there's like one section of people honking at each other. The others don't know what's going on. There's a lot of confusion. So I really like that too. That he focused a little bit on the communication that the audience members would have to go through in order to get out of there.
Well, and
Karloff's
Karloff
sitting there
too.
in his car, just thinking like, "Oh God, everyone hates this
my movie.
Everyone's
they're all leaving."
I love that bit because before they start freaking out, he's just like, it's strange to like not hear any sort of like audience reaction, right? Because again, he's used to like. He's used to having people sit in a theater when he shows up to his premiere, but his new premiere for his new film is at the drive-in. And then then the cars start actually like leaving and honking and freaking out, and he's just like, damn, they must really not have responded to this movie, I guess.
I think once the horns start honking, this completely kicks it into next gear and is like, from here on out, just pure fucking cinema, as good as it gets, because you have like this death of, this classic cinema, this idea we've been working at this whole time, where we see, an icon as iconic as anyone else from the 30s. Fucking Boris Karloff, like the universal monster cycle. Come on. And you just have all these horns honking and people leaving a movie, and you have Peter Bogdanovich walking through this crowd of people getting shot at, not realizing what's going on. This flood of lights all over. It's completely abstracted. It actually reminded me quite a bit of Michelangelo Antonioni, to bring back a thread from the beginning, just in that way that it's just like this pure situation of composition, movement, and abstract sound, and a character moving through it. But Bogdanovich doesn't let you get that navel-gazy, because then he also gets the super Corman exploitation, good old American boys together, and this like fucking militia forms in the drive-in. You get these 5 dudes.
They have their guns ready.
Fucking guns. Yeah, they just fucking brought their pistols to the drive-in.
I was just gonna mention that. It's the most American thing ever. I loved it. Like the whole front row just had dads like with gats ready to go.
Yeah.
It's so funny,
because,
man.
Like Bobby's not an anachronism here. Like, there are like the progressive. Or not
His dad is one of those
the
guys.
Liberal hippies. Yeah, there's the liberal hippies and stuff, but there's a lot of good old American boys too. Like,
That's right. That's right. And I guess that's what propels it to the moment that that Karloff gets, right? Because then he says to start kind of shooting out with people, and then that's when Boris approaches.
Well, I also love that Bogdanovich highlights that moment too, because a huge part of how he's been able to do this is that he's been able to just walk into a store and go get the guns, because it's something him and his dad do together, right? There is like a scene that there's a tiny bit of tension when, he's like, put it on my dad's bill, and he thinks that the guy is going to like actually call his dad, but his dad doesn't, because there's a level of trust in, the sort of community of sort of, people who are very passionate about guns. And so to have all of those guys also just all be at the drive-in at the same time, like it's just a version of his family. His dad, if his dad took him to the drive-in, his dad would probably have been the exact same one of those guys.
Oh, absolutely. His dad would have fucking shot at the screen when he saw the rifle poking out.
And then Karloff, man, walking towards the screen, like towards
the best
flashing
money
between,
shot of the movie.
Badass.
And it's really
cutting
a
very
three-way
fast
money shot. Yeah. It's the 3 shots, the image of Karloff on the screen, that beautiful image of Karloff walking toward the camera in long shot with like lit by the reflection of the drive-in screen, and just the terrified Bobby not knowing what's going on as movies become reality. And he shoots first at Karloff. He misses, so he shoots at the fucking movie screen.
Yes, dude, he's lost it. Like both have become one and the same for him. This real life Karloff and the movie Karloff. And also the fact that he knows him. Like when he aims that sniper at him earlier, he brags to the family about how he saw Orlok, who is the character that he's playing in the film.
And I like,
so it's a guy that he knows. So
I like that
he thinks he's fantasizing.
Right. And I like that it gives Karloff like that kind of I don't know if you want to call it like retribution or anything like that, but it's like that feeling he's had the whole time where, his version of horror movies and, his persona of that horror icon is kind of dwindling. And now he's literally walking towards the mass murdering, like horror icon of today and, hitting him with the cane, kind of punching him out, slapping him in the face
with his cane,
and he's so scared.
When he slaps
Bobby,
him in the face, that is just rule.
Yeah,
like,
and Bobby's so scared that he's shooting at Boris and then shooting back at the screen. So it's kind of justified. He could probably feel justified that he's like, that fear came back. Like my iconic horror persona is back, baby. They're scared again.
Yeah. Well, then he looks at the disarmed, scared little anonymous boy, and he goes, "Is that what I was afraid of?"
Yeah.
In the newspaper headlines, is that sinking feeling that this thing that I was terrified of was just, something so, on the surface kind of normal, and all you're kind of left with there is kind of like the confusion of kind of that moment.
Yeah.
And the implication of once again that Bogdanovich has turned that fear into a kind of his own horror movie that we're watching take place here, and that moment kind of rings with the story that he tells earlier in the film too, where he talks about this guy who runs into death in a marketplace, and death gives him this like odd look, and it freaks the guy out, and he's so frightened he steals a horse and he travels to Samarra or whatever from Baghdad. And then the guy goes and talks to Death later and tells him that he didn't make any sort of strange look or threat at his friend, that Death was just surprised to see him because he had an appointment later with him in Samara.
And
so
I love
it's
how
it's
that
this
scene is played so classic. Like he starts it in the wide shot. I think there's like 5 people in the room, and it's the wide
Yes.
shot that just slowly pushes in on Karloff over that like 4
he
minute
totally
story.
gives him a 1930s storytelling moment, and
Yeah,
it's so
it's
effective
awesome.
because Karloff used to do that all the time. So it's obviously a great little nostalgia thing that he does, and Karloff is just again a great reader of stories. So the story when he tells it is a lot more impactful, but then also the story being one of about a guy who was so afraid and afraid of what essentially was this kind of predetermined violence that he will never actually understand in any kind of meaningful way, and that's the exact same feeling that Karloff is kind of left with when this kid goes down, because obviously he takes the kid down. Technically that should be sort of happy ending, but it doesn't really feel that
And
way.
also
If
looking at
you're-
a young 20-year-old that just did this act too must be something for his character, I think, and just in general, just because I mean you're watching somebody that's he's a young adult. By all means, he was probably going to be successfully at a family, all that stuff, and Karloff's just looking at him like there's nothing but sadness here. That's just
definitely.
Yeah.
Well, and then all those sirens and darkness that Bogdanovich kind of ends on in that final confrontation, just giving way to that big wide of the daylight drive-in with the lone car in it as the credits go, and it's complete silence.
Yeah, and Bobby saying the last line of the movie is something like, I hardly ever missed, like with a really positive inflection in his voice, like he's very proud of himself. Is
he did a
terrifying.
good job.
Yeah, terrifying stuff. But yeah, that ending shot with the empty parking lot and just Bobby's Mustang in the middle of it, just the lone car in the lot, like at the last thing that that lot's gonna remember, kind of thing. It's just it's a pretty devastating image.
Yeah. Well, pivoting towards, I think, the reductive rating round on this one. This one gets the 5 from me. For sure. This one, when I first watched it, really, really blew me away. I was surprised I hadn't actually heard kind of like more about it, honestly. So I'm hoping anyone who hasn't given it a chance listening to the show would definitely go and check it out. But as I said at the beginning, and we kind of covered it kind of beat by beat there, but like I think this is just a really amazing movie, sort of self-reflexive kind of film that Bogdanovich has turned again his production limitations into something that is actually relevant to what he's saying about sort of like the history of film, and taking this old Hollywood actor from the 1930s who came from an era of horror movies that was all gothic castles and spooky stories, and updated it for what if that actor had lived long enough and become an old man and seen the way that the industry had changed, and how they made exploitation movies now, they made Corman movies, and how they might make a Corman movie, say, out of mass shootings, out of a time in America when a lone gunman could just occupy a tower for a few hours and just kill dozens of people for no reason. And Bogdanovich's camera absolutely captures the both the vast difference between these two parallel stories, but when they converge, he very expertly converges them together, and you really do get those feelings as you're watching that gun stick through the movie screen. You're watching the gunman literally lose track between the real Karloff and the movie Karloff, and again, also just very, very creepy little thriller completely on its own, even if you don't completely sink into Bogdanovich's ideas about movies in this. He is very much, it's just a very creepy little horror story at the same time of this kid just on the surface a clean cut insurance guy who just goes on a absolutely terrifying killing spree with all again sort of like the sudden and blunt and ugly violence that kind of comes with that, and then watching an old actor basically play himself reacting to this new world, sort of 40 years later. It's a really, really amazing piece of filmmaking, I think. So yeah, 5.
I'm also gonna give it a 5. Don't have too much to add, but I just love the idea of using Karloff as like this character to express the transition from the classic old horror and thriller Hollywood to the new stuff we see today that's just so full of sickos. And we do love it on the show, but it's very interesting to use Karloff as kind of the character to represent that. So that was awesome. I am very surprised to see that the guy that played Bobby wasn't in anything else, because he does kind of have that kind of classic leading man look to him. I'm not sure about the performance if he were to have another shot, but because he's very kind of dead-eyed in this. But it's I just found it interesting that he didn't have anything else. I would have been interested to see him in like a Western or something. But yeah, 5 out of 5, masterpiece. This thing is unbelievable.
For you, Eddie.
All right. Well, I think to contrast what you guys said, I think like as much as he is commenting on this exploitation style of filmmaking that he even has to go through working for Corman, I feel like this is just as much about his resistance to kind of his compatriots in New Hollywood. Unlike a lot of the Hollywood Renaissance directors, Bogdanovich kind of wanted New Hollywood to be Hollywood 2.0. Like all the great movies had been made. He wouldn't dare attempt genre revisionism to the extent of Altman because he respected the classics. And this is a film of a student of the game. He is a Saris-like auteurist who rightfully dreaded this new wave of filmmakers who would rewrite John Ford or Howard Hawks without even understanding the movies. So what he does is he self-inserts as like a savior of historically great cinema, while also taking cues from his idols and, also giving us this clockwork-like precise slow burn thriller on the other end of it. And it's this dialectic of like self-conscious New Hollywood tendencies and his utter devotion to just making a good old genre movie that makes this such a unique entry in the New Hollywood canon. And so it's an easy 5 for me, and just like one of the most interesting movies ever.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and how easy he makes that, that combination of the two seem. Because it's something that, it does feel like it shouldn't work as well as it does, but it just does.
Yep.
Really, really taken with it. All right, well, I think that will wrap it up for Targets. We are going to be right back, and we are going to be talking about next Hi Mom! ! Let's
go.
And we're both drained. And
Well, when?
would you wait about 25 minutes?
You are a pillar in the system that is oppressing the black people and all the poor people in the world, no matter what color they are.
I don't know what are you talking about.
Avon Street! Avon Street! Isn't that great?
Tragedy is it's a funny thing.
All right, we are back, and we are talking Hi Mom!, the 1970 American black comedy film, as listed here, directed by Brian De Palma, and also, I believe, the second film of a little actor called Robert De Niro, a quasi-sequel to his first film with Brian De Palma, Greetings, and I use sequel very, very loosely because essentially he's just playing he's essentially just playing the same character. Greetings is kind of like this more sort of like walking around the city kind of comedy about a bunch of friends who are dodging the draft to Vietnam.
Okay.
And so he's coming back in as the character he played in that film, but playing him post-Vietnam after he has returned to New York.
Greetings ends, if you'll remember, with an ending similar to Hi Mom, where he's talking to a news reporter, but from Vietnam, from the action, and he basically just says, I don't know what I'm doing here. But just to correct you real quick, not to De Palma-splain, but it's actually his third movie and De Niro's third as well. It was a delayed release, though. The first one they did, The Wedding Party.
What? The wedding party? The wedding party
that was the
came
first
out,
one they made. It was released way after, though. That was the first one they made.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Damn.
And
it's kind of unfortunate because the wedding party is like one of
sucks.
my least favorite De Palmas, I think.
Yeah, that movie is
that's what I've
awful,
heard.
but it's more of a collab with like his Sarah Lawrence buddies. Whereas Greetings and Hi Mom, like there's still a collab with that one writer producer, but it's so much more of a De Palma film. Whereas, the wedding party feels like a Sarah Lawrence art project that De Palma had a hand in, you know?
Yeah, De Palma and Hirsch, I think, shared equal writing credit on Hi Mom for this one. Because, it was his buddy Charles Hirsch. And both of them, they were kind of just students in the anti-war movement, kind of just like fucking around. And they had an interest in, sort of like what films can say and do in moments of sort of, societal upheaval, like in this time. It basically takes like the premise. It's funny because this movie, if you describe it to someone, it's about a Vietnam vet who returns to New York and he gets involved in, various underground social movements, one of them sort of being peep art. You get this idea that this should be one of De Palma's most Hitchcockian movies. It's essentially, John Rubin, who Robert De Niro is playing, he starts off by kind of, pitching this idea of Rear Window, but pornographic.
Right, yeah.
And you would think that would translate into something Hitchcockian, but what was interesting is, as Eddie kind of mentioned, that he actually turns it into something that is more of kind of like this radical guerrilla filmmaking, this sort of like countercultural comedy about making peep art and the ideas of sort of like cameras and televisions as the ultimate peep art, and cameras and televisions being everywhere, cameras shooting the war, people watching all these lives taking place on their television screens, including things like the war kind of like at a distance. And it's a precursor too for De Niro, for both not just Travis Bickle, who he gets a lot of comparisons in here too, just because he's he wears the jacket, he comes back from Vietnam, he kind of goes a little he gets a little antisocial and strange, and he gets involved in all this weird stuff. What's interesting is that I would say on like a moment to moment character level, he actually reminds me more of Rupert Pupkin, the King of Comedy version of this character.
Yeah, for sure. I see that 100%.
Where he's constantly putting on, like this kind of performance that he's playing in this sort of America that he comes back to. And you kind of get this feeling that he doesn't have a sincere interaction with anyone in this entire movie.
He doesn't, no.
He just kind of has some strange ideas, and he kind of pursues these movements because he kind of is interested in kind of the artistic thrill, but he's also in some ways less expressed than say it is in Taxi Driver. There is a little bit of anger to his character, like in the opening scene when he comes back from the war and he's talking to this landlord who's just digging through the trash behind the building, and he's inquiring about this rundown apartment that has no working door. It's completely filthy. It's got like cat litter and shit in it.
And you're getting his point of view, which is very interesting too. And they do like these like
I love the structural approach there. Like there's so many scenes that take a very detached stylistic approach. This one being an entirely point of view handheld shot that's broken up with Godardian jump cuts.
Right.
But I think that distancing effect does such a great job because, Josh, you're right in like assuming that it would be more Hitchcockian. Oh, shit. Hey, are you guys there? I just got disconnected.
Yeah, it's okay, Joe. Just start at when you said, I think that distancing effect.
Yeah, I think we're all good. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so he uses these Godardian jump cuts instead, and each scene, has this kind of distancing effect. And Josh, you were right in what you were saying about how you would think it's more Hitchcock, but then it's not because of the approach. And it's kind of this balance that I think De Palma has to strike throughout his whole career of being part Hitchcock and you could say part Godard, but I think more than anything it's just like taking from the same people Godard took from, part Brecht more than anything else, and you're using this distancing effect to make the audience aware of the social ramifications of the situations he's showing you and why he's making the aesthetic choices that he's making. So, you know, a long time ago, I wrote a very bad college essay about this and Body Double, but I think they share a link of being kind of on the other ends of the spectrum there. Because Body Double is him at one of his most Hitchcockian. He's fully just leaning into the voyeurism. It's the cinema of looking at women and doing following tracking shots, and also like wrong man thriller stuff as well. But he is using that Brechtian detachment to show you the links between genre cinema, pornography, and popular culture of the 1980s. And here he's doing that with like underground guerrilla movements and underground film movements and stuff like that, and the inefficiency of the counterculture. And it's really just a genius film for that aspect. And I think it's great for showing anyone who thinks De Palma does make dumb, sleazy movies how smart he is and how much he is intellectualizing all these decisions that he makes even in his sleaziest movies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we will say this goes to this does have one of De Palma's most notorious sequences in it, which we will get to. That is definitely, you know, meant to be an early kind of, you know, student provocation kind of thing. But he is doing things more interesting, especially if you go and you kind of like read up on the film a little bit too, because I went and found it because I think it was Hirsch in an interview was talking about it, and I was very curious about what he was referring to. But the opening scene where he's talking to the landlord about the rundown apartment, and the landlord's trying to like overcharge him $75 for it or whatever, because it's, you know, it's got like filthy mattresses, the doors are breaking off, the fridge is broken, and it cuts it. The only time it breaks, the POV shot of De Niro holding the camera at the landlord is a close-up of De Niro's face, just smiling, going, "I'll take it." And you're kind of being like, that is such a strange kind of positive reaction to the sequence that we've just been watching. But it turns out that this entire sequence is actually a parody of what was a public service announcement on television in New York at the time by a group called the New York Urban Coalition, in which a similarly slimy like landlord essentially showed this apartment to like a black man, and the black man had to be like, "Wow, this is great. I'll take it."
Right. Oh my God. I love how De Niro has to haggle with him too. He's like, you said it was $45 a month, not $60. And the guy's like, "Well, I said it was $45. I didn't know there was all this great furniture in here."
Yeah, it's all just smashed on the ground.
Garbage. It's literally just an apartment filled with garbage.
Yeah, this is a perfectly good chair leg. I mean, you gotta spend another $5. So funny.
I love how much detail there is in this. There's even the business card of the producer De Niro for his links up with that just says instant and then $ for erotic art. And that leads to one of my favorite comedic scenes in the De Palma filmography, where De Niro is trying to grease the wheels of this porno producer to fund his peep art project. And they just hang out in a porno theater. And De Niro keeps looking at the bathroom, and the guy's like, "Don't worry about that. Don't worry about what goes on in there."
Yeah, I like too that De Niro, the way that he captures De Niro kind of getting this idea is because he's looking at the interior of the apartment is so horrible that he says, "But you got a great view," and he opens up the window and he sees all of the, he sees the building next to them, the sort of nicer building with all these different things, and it replicates that rear window shot of all the frames within frames of all these little mini kind of stories taking place inside them, like little TV screens, and there's this very upbeat little like almost like sitcom intro music.
Oh yeah. Very sitcom.
Where he's talking about like recording all his dreams and peeping through window and seeing life on little screens. And Jamie, I'm sure the trailer will include like pieces of the music, but if it doesn't, you should insert one of the songs at one point in here.
Yeah, there are a couple songs in this between the Hi Mom intro and the Be Black Baby theme song that are just such quintessential works of like De Palma toying with TV music, kind of, because another thing that I think he's really kind of underheralded for is mixed media kind of stuff. Like when he shoots, is it Sisters that opens with a game show, or is that Carrie? I forgot which one it was. Sorry, I'm totally
I know what you're talking about. For some reason, I can't forget.
Early
I
De
can't
Palma
remember
knowledge
either
right now. But regardless, the NIT public service TV show that is on this one, which is like National Intellectual Television, kind of a spoof of, you know, the highbrow efforts of national television at the time, and also like the porno channel in Body Double, to bring back that one. I think his dedication to, you know, separating film from TV, and then in this one invoking TV with music as well as visual aesthetics, is really genius. And also, I mean, those songs are just so fucking catchy.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're so good, and the tone doesn't prepare you for, you know, some of the actual subject matter that the film is going to take, because it kind of has that kind of that goofy comedy to it. Even some of the way that he gauges the performances, like especially the porn producer, like he really nails. It made me, you know, because I mean I've seen The Wise Guys and I wasn't crazy about it, but it did make me wonder, you know, what a De Palma like full out comedy would look like, the scenes with the porn producer, when, you know, again there's the scene where they're talking in the porno house, where he's like, look at that cleavage, you don't get that in a Fellini film. And
well, I know you're not crazy about Wise Guys, but that's also kind of an assignment movie, and I think if De Palma like makes one of his auteur movies as a comedy, that's a lot different. Like something like this, or even his next one, Get to Know Your Rabbit, is a little more tame, but it's a very goofy comedy starring one of the Smothers brothers and Orson Welles in a supporting role as a magician.
Yeah, I need to see that one.
Yeah, that one is insane.
Yeah, but I love the conversations he has with that porn producer, where he's like showing him the buildings, because he's trying to pitch this porn producer on getting money for like a project, and he's like, why are you showing me real estate? You think this tall building is going to sell movies? I know about phallic symbols. Don't tell me about phallic symbols.
And then he just points to some random guy in a porn store. He's like, see, this guy know what's up.
He's buying a porno mag. He's like, he's like, come over here. Would you buy this if this was in a magazine? Would you buy this shit? But he eventually does pitch him on the idea of peep art.
Oh, sorry. I just want to say about that scene. The dialogue throughout this is mainly improvised. They outlined scenes and improvised mainly, and I think that kind of comes from that, you know, theater troupe type milieu that De Palma was working within. And you even get a little bit of that interactive theater later on with Bebop Baby. And one of his earlier films, if you can even call it a film, is Dionysus in '69, which is his split screen filmed performance of Dionysus with some of the same actors as this also. And I think that him just kind of poking fun of that theatrical milieu that he knows he's better than is a very fun thing about this movie. But he's also using that approach, that improv approach that those theater losers were doing at the time.
Mm-hmm. Well, and also the way that he'll cut them together, like the way that conversation with the porn producer actually takes place over like 3 or 4 different locations, but it's a continuation of the conversation that they are so improvising.
Awesome. And he does that with obviously later on too.
Yeah, it's a great little technique, because it leads to some moments of kind of, you know, great comedy, like when he's still trying to pitch him, like he's bringing in his like art poster board for his pitch on the movie, but the guy can't even see it because it's being filled up in like the steam shower room that they're in. He literally just can't even
him in a sauna, and the producer's just like eating a roast beef sandwich in the sauna.
Oh god.
Yeah, well,
so ridiculous.
He eventually convinces him on the peep art. He gets the $2,000 that he asks for to start filming, and he sets up his camera across, and he's taking, you know, all these different little films on all the characters across the street, like in Rear Window, all seen sort of like through his lens. But he sees like a family shooting home videos. He sees like a photographer kind of having various women over and having relationships with them. But then he also sees this sort of like young radical NYU student who keeps painting his entire body black, and his camera kind of keeps catching this guy, and he's kind of like, I don't really know like what's up with this guy. I'm kind of drawn to this guy, but at the same time, you know, he's like, this isn't really what I'm supposed to be filming. I'm supposed to be trying to film, you know, sort of like little sexy shows. So eventually, he's watching this sort of like lonely girl in one of the windows, and he imagines himself at one point sort of like joining her and bringing her flowers in. And it's really cool the way that De Palma films it, because it's all these kind of like from the point of view of what De Niro's character is shooting, but then he imagines himself shooting it also in the frame. And his fantasies about, you know, just going over to the girl and sparking up a relationship, becoming part of the film that he's making, start to infect like the real movie in a way. And at that point, he just kind of goes bozo mode. He decides to like pretend to have some sort of like weird like date setup. This weird like early like online dating version thing where he's going to show up. And,
well, he maps this is also
all
from
the steps
Greetings
to the
too.
Second.
Oh, I just wanted to say the idea of the computer date. One of the three buddies in Greetings has a mishap with that. And so the fact that this is just something that these, Hirsch and De Palma were just like, yeah, I guess this is just the future, man. People are just going to be sociopaths who, punch in their data to online things to get dates with strangers. But he fakes this. He pretends that
he fakes it, which is so interesting.
And it's such a funny, psychotic way in, where he walks the audience through it before by talking to himself. He's like, okay, it'll take me 26 minutes to seduce her, and I'll have to get her up right at that angle. And he does just that, despite the fact that this girl just wants to fuck him because they went on a date, and he's like, okay, but we'll wait till tomorrow so that he could, set up his camera from across
so that he can film it as part of the Peep Art show.
So he films it. He has the red light going, but we all know what the phallic symbol is, the camera, and he can't keep it up, unfortunately. The sexual act, I'm sure, went swimmingly, as we find out later on that they have a family on the way. They have a little baby on the way. But the camera kept panning down. So then we get he develops the film, brings it right to the producer, and we see it. And unfortunately, we do see the camera pan down to the young revolutionary, putting himself in black face, black body, black penis being the very last thing, and we see his hesitation to paint his bare penis black before doing it.
That's what's funny is he's entirely black except for his white penis in the shot. And the porn producer is like, I paid $2,000 for a dude doing blackface except for his penis.
I also read that the reason that like before this movie was actually got an X rating, and they made it so, and the only reason was because he painted his penis black. And they're like, no, you can't have that.
Oh my God.
So just show the penis.
That's so funny.
And you're good. Just don't have him paint the penis. I thought that was fucking hilarious. So there's my little trivia knowledge there.
Yeah. And I love how it's just like John traded in his camera for a TV set, and so many, we see
his film career went poorly.
Yeah, we see this story all the time. If you're on film Twitter, I'm sure you've seen this. Guy goes to Brooklyn, he tries to be a filmmaker, he realizes he's not cut out for it, so he turns to political action.
This is definitely the Peep Art sitcom to revolutionary violence pipeline movie for sure.
Yeah, Jamie, were you taken aback by kind of the route that this goes on in the second half?
I'm actually glad you asked me, because I know I've been kind of silent throughout this one so far, and it's just because that really was it. It just kind of threw me for a loop. I wasn't quite sure, and I still don't 100% know if I understand the connection between him doing the peep show art and then going to the Black Revolutionaries, and then him being mixed in as playing, and we'll get to the details, but the white cop that's kind of playing the brutal cop. And obviously they chose him for a specific reason. So honestly, I've just been sitting here kind of taking all of it in and trying to learn something here, because I did find myself
it is definitely a lot to take in on a first viewing.
I found myself more confused with the connections of the two storylines than I did with Targets, for instance. I found like those came together just really easily and cohesively, whereas this one I was a little bit more jarred, I guess.
Well, yeah. Well, and I think that's part of it too, because there is, there's a very freewheeling kind of structure to it. Where he really is the character of John Rubin. He really is just kind of following his impulses and moving from underground social movement to the next. Presumably, you're supposed to assume, because he doesn't really fit into any of the normal ones after Vietnam. The interview with Hirsch, he kind of talked about they came to this character idea and they kind of beat Paul Schrader and Taxi Driver to this idea. But like part of it was that, this guy just killed a bunch of people. He came back and he's being given this filthy apartment, and the only things that he sees around him that sort of strike an interest in terms of images is these underground social movements, and both in the idea of sort of like in a filmic sense, both with porn and style experimentation and things like that. But then to him, it's sort of listening to Hirsch talk about it. It's really funny that you said what you said too, Jamie, because he's just like, this is the most logical movie I think De Palma and I ever wrote. Like to him, he's just like, yeah, this just makes perfect sense that he would just he would immediately move on to the next thing. And what's such an interesting idea is how cynically he just kind of adapts to these things. Like he's not like a believer. He's not someone who looks at these things and he's just like, I really do fully believe in this movement.
Yeah, he does kind of play it like it's just something to do, like it's something to focus on almost. So it's a task of some kind.
Think about how it contrasts him setting up the performance so that he can do the peep art, and he's timing it, and he's like, okay, I got 26 minutes to seduce her. I got to make sure that I don't run out of film and that the camera's rolling at the right time and we can see her at the right time. Like he's
very detailed, very to the point.
He's rehearsing being a boyfriend, right? So that he can create this weird sicko art out of it. And the other time that we see him rehearsing in this film, the only other time, is when he's shouting at a fake hippie protester, and he's literally doing police brutality on like a ladder and a mop and like slapping it around, and he's like, you think make love not war? I make love pretty well, you slut. He starts like slapping the broom.
That might be the funniest scene in the movie, is De Niro's audition for Be Black Baby, where it's just cutting to, it very quickly cut in those jump cuts to just the best moments of De Niro flipping the fuck out. It's fantastic. And I also like that, as I said, he's doing the mixed format thing, and I didn't really describe what he's doing, though. All the NIT, National Intellectual Television stuff, that's what follows this theater troupe. The first one is about the first segment of that, rather, is early on in the film, and it's about them handing out flyers for Be Black Baby and trying to get the word out. And there's a very funny scene where they're arguing with these white liberals, these old liberals who are like, we know, we marched in Washington, we helped you already. And while that argument is going on, you just see a newspaper stand get fucking robbed, and like a guy get shot.
The guy gets shot twice too, yeah. And no one really reacts. It's just kind of like
no one arguing is like, this is just a thing that happens in the background.
It's all in this very and it's all in this very like frenetic 16 millimeter TV documentary style that reminds me kind of like and I've made this comparison of other stuff before, but reminded me just a couple years earlier was Frederick Wiseman's Law and Order, which there are a couple scenes in that literally feel like they're in a snuff film, because it's like 16 millimeter handheld footage of actual police brutality. And this film kind of recalled that style of realism to me, particularly in, now we get to, I think, part 3 of that NIT series, the Be Black Baby performance itself.
One of the most great set pieces in unhinged and like harrowing things that he's ever filmed.
Oh yeah, man.
Absolutely.
Oh my god.
Absolutely, man. So basically, the play is an interactive experience. You get these audience members, these bourgeoisie liberal, or even they would think to themselves left of liberal, intellectual New Yorkers who read the New Yorker, and they want to know what it's like to be black. So what does this theater troupe do? They treat them how white America treated black people. First, they rob them. They literally take their wallets, take the money out of them, take the lady's purse, and then they put them in blackface, and they force feed them soul food. And it's one of the funniest
black-eyed peas.
Yeah. Just like watching this fucking like chubby white guy with blackface already dripping off of his face being force-fed pig feet is so good. And just like the fragile white lady, she didn't take her purse, but she took my purse. I don't like that.
Yeah.
I like too when they have them feel the texture of like black people's skin and hair and have them describe it. And one dude is like, it feels like steel wool but soft.
Good Lord.
It's insane. But comedy slowly kind of fades as it becomes more and more and more intense. De Palma escalates this set piece over 20 minutes. It's like, I think it's a 2-camera setup. Pretty much feels like real time, just cutting between the 2 cameras. There's like very few moments where it feels like he's speeding ahead in time. And I think it's definitely one of his best edited set pieces, despite the fact that it's literally just cutting between 2 16mm handheld cameras, you know?
Just watching the chaos, really.
Because it's like that
and it's a complete
did, Dionysus in '68, but it's just like his version of doing that in actual cinema. Rather, because Dionysus in '68, what he does is he does a split screen presentation of the full play. So he shoots with 2 cameras and presents it in split screen. Here, he's using editing. I mean, he would return to split screen later on, obviously, but I think the editing here is what makes this come alive as cinema rather than watching a fake version of an interactive play, you know?
Yeah.
Well, and it's for me, it's just like a completely visceral shattering of sort of like that distance that we've been talking about. This idea of something on TV, you know, is there's that inherent distance to it between sort of like the artist and the audience, and this just breaks down that safety barrier. You are just dropped the same way that these audience members, you know, because at first you're just kind of the ridiculousness of what the students have come up with as an idea on an image level is kind of it's kind of funny, and you're engaging with it on that level of watching these kind of just like very uppity white liberals being put blackface on and being kind of given a microcosm of the black experience is the idea. But then, as he just continues on in real time and he builds that unbearable sense of sort of like assault and humiliation of it, as he basically just unleashes full racist and sexual violence on all of these people. And it's really, really brutal. Like you, as Eddie kind of pointed out, you do feel like, because I haven't seen Law and Order, but if it as Eddie described it, it just feels like snuff footage of police brutality. That's eventually what this just ends up feeling like, even though he maintains that that screen format of it looking like you're watching on one of those kind of like oval television screens, like it's 16mm, but like it's sort of cut in within the frame to look like you're just watching this on TV.
Have the curved edges.
But they would never fucking show this shit on TV. Like, and like that contradiction actually just makes it even freakier, almost in a way, as they literally just start like, you know, herding them like cattle at gunpoint and assaulting them, selling them like sex slaves, literally raping them. And then that's before De Niro comes in as the cop character. And he immediately deputizes all of the black characters who are wearing whiteface and playing the white characters in this performance. He immediately deputizes them and starts just beating up all of the white people in blackface because they don't have their IDs because they've all been robbed.
Yeah,
it's like incredible. It's such a crazy thing where you like, you know what you're watching isn't a real thing, that it's performance, but somehow it builds to a real sense of like, you feel like you're watching police brutality. You feel like you're watching.
Yeah, I was definitely uncomfortable.
Racist and sexual violence. Like, it's what you feel like you're watching, and it's all done in just the way that he's filmed it. And the best touch of all of this is that when those people get out, man, they get out,
brings the
and they
comedy
realize finally. Yeah, they realize that, oh my God, that was all part of the show. It didn't get out of hand at all.
I'm going to invite my friends. They should all be a part of this.
I love the Clyde Barnes was really right. That was a great show. He was the theater critic in New York at the time.
And it's like, you think maybe the woman who was sexually assaulted would think that it
have
went
an
too
issue
far. And
still.
as she's walking out, and her clothes are completely torn apart, looks like she's wearing rags, and all of these white characters just in the New York street with blackface dripping off of them, also covered in sweat, just disheveled. And I don't think it's the lady who was assaulted. I think it's the other lady who looks at the camera and says, it makes you really understand what it's like to be a Negro. And it's one of the craziest line deliveries I've ever, and like, she's immediately corrected to say, and then she just says black right after that. But like that line delivery after what we've just seen is one of the most like that. That's De Palma as the political ironist at his finest. I don't think he's ever like surpassed that. Maybe outside of his film Redacted, but that feels like that's his like best moment right there as a political ironist.
Yeah, and I love how they're all talking in that language too. Where they're like, I'm just tickled that I came. This was invigorating. Should have been called humiliate the honky, I think, though. And what's crazy too is that this is the middle chapter of the movie. There's still one more chapter left where he realizes, because of the way that they experienced that and their reaction to the show, they realize that what they're doing still isn't enough to get across the actual message what they got. They still don't get it. They still don't like. They think that was a fun little show that they went out to on a Friday night. That wasn't the experience that people actually have. So what does he get into? He starts reading The Urban Gorilla, and he starts getting into.
Oh, I was going to say the Urban Gorilla segment is after he kind of ditches that group and goes solo. What happens after that is they just want to infiltrate the homes of these people and basically bring B Black Baby to the houses of people.
Right, but actually he actually cross cuts between, because it cuts first to De Niro reading the book. And he starts describing paramilitary activities in urban areas and plotting on bringing B Black Baby to, the silent majority, as they say it, bringing it into these more urban spaces, and to all the people who are smoking their pipes and reading the New York Times and things like that.
And so it's another set piece like this, but it's a different approach. It's like you have this up-tempo, almost heist music behind this infiltration that De Niro watches on TV while he just has his gun in hand. And like, it's such an incredible set piece in terms of building momentum as they all kind of flood into this apartment building. But then one of them just gets snatched by the neck and brought into an apartment building. One gets shot, and it's like the end of Targets, where it's like, oh yeah, no, the conservative white Americans with guns are still out there, despite the liberal hippies that might be clouding your judgment of America. And a door gets opened, and we basically see, the family from Targets. We see a nuclear American family huddled around a fucking turret. Just
like a Gatling gun.
Yeah, it's insane. And De Niro's response is just to shoot his pistol like at the TV, and De Palma reverses the footage and fast forwards it and replays it like 5 times, and it's just this catharsis, and it's an incredible set piece.
And as that set piece is taking place, it's going back and forth actually between him reading about the idea that organized revolutionary movements have always been infiltrated by government agents. So so successful acts of sabotage have to be carried out by single individuals. A lone saboteur must assimilate into the urban community and assume the bougie lifestyle and everything like that.
So you get that little slice of domesticity with his date who he impregnated, which I would assume maybe the first time, probably the only time he had sex coming back from Vietnam, at least, like in this fugue detached state. And he impregnated this woman. You know, they got a bun in the oven. He's like, okay, I'm going to go put the laundry in. And he blows up the fucking building, and you get this incredible long take with this zoom in as he's running down the hallway. Apparently, like the longest hallway they could find in that neighborhood for the shot. And it's so great. And again, go back to the TV, and we get this guy, a black man named Dr. King. You know, De Palma winks at the camera, or from behind the camera, rather. And he's talking about how this man must have been a victim of his circumstance. You know, look at America around you. These people are going to snap. The poverty, like the disparity in wealth that people have, and the social systems that are worthless, and this endless war. And then De Niro in uniform comes by, and he's like, you know, I don't like what you're saying. I was just sweeping up some other country. I come over here and I got this bullshit going on. I'm sick of this. And then they censor a bunch. You have to think he's dropping the N-word, honestly. Like, there's one where it's like really bad. And it's like, oh, this is pure Bickle mode.
There was one slur in there at least.
Yeah, and then he ends the movie by saying the title. And he says hi to his mommy from the TV. And it's a great joke to end the movie.
Yeah, big sitcom music again.
Yeah, exactly. But that solo infiltration, and then not just living the liberal bougie lifestyle, but being like a fucking, you know, right-wing nut and saying that we need to protect America as his cover for blowing up a building is just a fantastic cherry on top.
And what's so crazy about that too is that De Palma, he sets you into like that sitcom kind of moment where he's talking, he's selling policies, he's reading the paper, he's smoking his pipe, he's talking to his pregnant wife and everything like that. But we know right away that all of this is performance because of all the different characters that he's played in the movie and that he's rehearsed to play. We know that he's just playing, you know, this guy who infiltrated, and he's taking with him this idea that, you know, all of the radicals that, you know, he sort of collaborated with on their performance art were all brutally killed. And he's just pretending to be part of like the sort of like white America aspect of it. But then when he blows it up, like, because we're supposed to presume that he blows up the building with his pregnant wife in it, right?
That's right.
Which is just insane.
Yeah.
He like, we literally watch him disintegrate the American like TV sitcom domestic lifestyle parody that he's doing. He literally explodes it and kills everyone inside. And what's funny is that when he does it, other than this Dr. King guy, the people don't actually seem to care that much. Like that murder
so
bugging
talking.
Yeah, it's the same as that murder that takes place at the newsstand. It's just another thing that happens on your TV screen that you watch. Why does it matter? And they're watching, like, the people who come up, they're just super excited. They're just like, hey, more space to walk my dogs, man.
Yeah, one guy's super excited about it. He said it was a great thing.
Yeah, I love how he leads. He's like, yeah, you know, a lot of people in this neighborhood have dogs, man, you know?
we want some space to walk those dogs, man. And then there's another dude who's like, I never liked that building. I lost my wallet in that building.
Yeah, he says, you ever look at who goes in and out of that building? A lot of strange characters, all hours of the evening. I love De Palma's like evisceration of that bourgeoisie lifestyle, even though they're in housing projects. It's like still that mindset that those people have of the bourgeoisie lifestyle that he's eviscerating. And like in that little scene with his wife, De Niro even says one of the, if you're going to say anything in the film is actually racist, it's when it says to his wife that she doesn't have to worry about, taking care of everything. He's going to hire some cheap colored help. And it's like, oh my God.
Like, well, he has like his hair slicked back and the pipe in his mouth.
His wife. Yeah. Like that is such a just like brutal vision of what that traditional nuclear American family is at this moment in time. I mean, I really just can't say enough about how scathing, hilarious, and just perfect this film is for me.
Yeah. I mean, well, pivoting towards reductive rating round here. This is probably like my third watch on this one, and as obviously De Palma has to be probably the filmmaker we've talked about the most on this show. So I basically just people will call me a stan at this point, but this one for sure is one that has really sat with me. A lot of its ideas have sat with me longer than other De Palmas. So this one's the 5 for me. Nice. Especially I think to just the way on like a filming level that this goes from sort of like domestic sex comedy almost to sort of like sitcom parody to filmmaking auto-critique to like the experimental radical theater that really gets under your skin to full out like guerrilla violence and then back to the sitcom. And it does all of this with effortless ease, just like painting a culture of, racism and masochism and violence. And it's a really just insane piece of low budget filmmaking that at every turn into typical De Palma fashion, it implicates the camera, it implicates the film and the television itself in this cycle of what sort of, the sort of social bonds of what America looked like at this point in time. And frequently it plays like comedy, while also, very subtly and darkly like breaking rules of both film and also social normacy in attempt to expose all these like strange contradictions and hypocrisies and impulses. And it really has just like gone up my De Palma ranking estimations pretty much every single time that I've watched it. So yeah, this is really incredible. And again, I never expected to see a film that, again, traced the peep art to protest violence pipeline and have it actually make some semblance of character sense. And also, we didn't get to talk about it a whole lot, but De Niro, my God. Just an absolute fucking chameleon.
I was just gonna say
in this movie, just the way he cynically invades all of those spaces and becomes one with the performances that he's putting on, while also destroying them in a lot of different ways. I mean, I don't think it's any surprise that almost everything that he gets into, either it ends up failing, all the people die, or he literally fucking blows it up. And then ending it all by looking at the TV screen and giving his mom a shout out. Just incredible. Incredible.
Yeah, I'm gonna give it the 4 for now. It is very strong. I just felt like I was pretty ignorant on why I was liking the movie a lot of the time. I was kind of expecting more of a, like when he opens up with that rear window, those images, I was expecting more of like a sleazy pornographic De Palma version of Rear Window or something like that. So when it
like more of like the thriller type structure.
So when it starts crossing with the Black Revolutionaries and their kind of like their art piece that they're creating and then merging it together, I wasn't quite sure what the two stories were saying in that sense, like cohesively. But what I am understanding more so after this conversation is the, like you said, the chameleon that is Robert De Niro in this movie. Just how it's like a man that can't quite find any real discernible identity, and so he just goes from like one social activism thing to the next, and not even that. It's not like just really anything, because it's not just necessarily social activism. It's also like just, I'm gonna make a porno. I've got a producer friend.
It's underground filmmaking, and then it's like literally like domestic terrorism. Like it's like
a man just trying to find himself, I guess, in the grossest possible way.
But what's interesting is they use that as a way of showing that, like, you know, it's more about the fact that all of these different spaces exist is because of the sickness of, you know, the way that America has been organized in its own way. And here's a guy just kind of wandering it like screwball comedy, just dropping into each room of what America looks like.
But still not shying away from the brutality of like the police violence, and even just like the street violence that occurs when they're doing the interviews and some guy gets just shot in the background and no one seems to care, you know, things like that. So yeah, I think I just need more time with this because it is a lot to take in. It was very jarring, but I really did enjoy it. And I mean, De Palma once again just knocks it out of the park. So God damn it, De Palma, you were a master.
This was my 5th time watching this, so I got to give it the 5, baby.
Oh yeah,
but I will say my first time I only gave it like 3.5, like, and then I gave it 4 the next time, and then I gave it a 5, you know. But it's one that I think the structure makes more sense when you've already seen it. I think it is kind of structured in a way that sometimes art house movies are structured, where it's like a structure of ideas rather than one that results in the payoff that like how a genre movie is generally structured, you know, like how I talked about with Targets, like that one, despite Bogdanovich wanting to make a very self-conscious movie about where they were going with movies, he like couldn't help but stay true to his genre instincts and bring in like a fucking tight genre movie. This one doesn't quite go there. Like De Palma wasn't quite who he would become yet. Like I think that balance of Hitchcock and Godard / Brecht or whatever, the scale was tipped a little bit here, but he still manages to make a masterpiece. And that's why I think like it's his best movie until, you know, the 80s, when he fully comes into his own with that balance of Hitchcock, Brecht, studio, you know, quote unquote friendliness, enough to get movies made at least. And I think that this is just a milestone for one of his most incredibly provocative films. And if you pair this with something like Redacted, you will see him, you know, 40 years apart, making films about America's problems at the time through bitter political irony, but also having those genre chops to just make disgusting and crazy set pieces come to life. So yeah, this is a masterpiece for me.
And Be Black Baby, almost as its own short film inside the film, definitely ranks, I think, at the top of one of the craziest things that he's just ever put on the screen.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. For me, this,
like, even just the image of seeing, you know, these black students in whiteface just replicating snuff police footage against liberals in blackface is one of the craziest things. And weirdly enough,
afterwards.
Yeah, it actually translates to something that we're going to be talking about next week, Black Caesar, which also has which has Fred Williamson suffer police brutality, and in his quest for revenge, he actually puts the policeman in blackface and eventually kind of like attempts to beat him to death to change the power hierarchy, where he imagines himself as a white cop beating up this cop in blackface. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's wild. It's very wild.
Yeah, Black Caesar's a crazy movie.
Yeah, so we're going to be talking about that that next week, but I think that'll wrap it up for this week's episode. That was Targets from 1968 and High Mom from 1970. Thanks so much, Eddie, for joining us and for bringing these films with you. If you've got anything to plug while you're here, this is usually where we have you do that.
Well, you know, I do a podcast, and it's called Chapo Trap House. No, I do a podcast called Extended Clip. And like this one, me and two of my friends, Malcolm and JT, two esteemed cinephiles like myself, we do a double feature every week. Yeah, we stole your guys' shit, like straight up.
You will be hearing from our people.
Josh has been on the show a couple times. We also have a bonus feed where we do different stuff we stole from another podcast too. So we have another show on our Patreon where it's like we go through the filmography of a director one by one. That show is called Bank Check. The Extended Clip Patreon is only $2 a month. We're undercutting the market. So go check that out. You will find full series. Excuse me. That was from the Diet Coke I've been drinking. You will find full series on the filmographies of the Farrelly brothers and Michael Cimino and so much other shit. And your boy Josh has made multiple appearances. The next episode of
I think I appeared on the Cimino where we talked Deer Hunter and Thunderbolt and Lightfoot, and also when I did a guest on one of the normal episodes, we've both brought De Palma on each other's shows because I think we did Deja Vu and Femme Fatale.
Oh, nice.
That is absolutely right. And the next episode of Extended Clip is going to be about Zack Snyder's Justice League, and Josh.
Yeah,
is
actually,
by
the time this goes up, I think our talk on the Snyder Cut should already be up.
Oh yeah, that's coming out this Monday.
Yeah, so
that'll be up.
But by the time you guys are listening to this episode, that was last Monday. So if you want to hear Eddie and I talk about the Snyder Cut along with Malcolm and JT, we're going to be doing that. We've already done it. Yeah, time travel, baby.
Yep. Right. And follow me on Letterboxd. Letterboxd.com/Eddie_A.
Nice.
Do it up, Eddie. Eddie is always watching all kinds of obscure films that I get lots of. I add lots of things to my watch list following Eddie on Letterboxd, so can recommend.
Yeah, I'm always playing Warzone with Josh, telling him about the porno I've been watching.
That's right.
I know there's some Pinku heads. You guys have talked about some Sato. Follow me for some Pinku recommendations.
Hell yeah. Well, for our listeners, we're going to be back in 1 week's time. As I already kind of alluded to, we're going to be talking blaxploitation crime films. We're going to be talking Black Caesar by Larry Cohen starring Fred Williamson, which is sort of a blaxploitation update on kind of like the old 30s gangster films. It literally takes its name from Little Caesar with Edward G. Robinson, but also, things like Howard Hawks' Scarface and Public Enemy and things like that. And we're going to be pairing that with Jonathan Kaplan's 1974 film Truck Turner, starring Isaac Hayes, as well as a soundtrack by Isaac Hayes, following up his Oscar-winning soundtrack for the movie Shaft.
Oh, nice!
And we're gonna be talking about Truck Turner, which was kind of his version of Shaft. In my opinion, it's a better version than Shaft. And Isaac Hayes, when he did the score for Shaft, he thought that he was going to be the lead, but they kind of fucked him over. So instead, he went on and made this, and I think it's just honestly one of the best little blaxploitation action movies that has ever been put on the screen. And Black Caesar is New York guerrilla filmmaking. Truck Turner is L.A. So we're going to be talking the two sides of sort of the blaxploitation city action crime films. We're going to have some fun doing that. And that's actually setting us up for the episode we're going to do after, where we're going to have special guest Jason Buford on the show, who is bringing with him some sort of comedic blaxploitation, some blaxploitation satires, which is why I felt like we needed to get a blaxploitation episode in there first before we did it. Get some more classical, get some of the canon ones in there, and then we're going to be talking about Rudy Ray Moore's Petey Wheatstraw, one of his follow-up films to Dolomite.
So excited!
So we're going to talk Petey Wheatstraw, which is an insane movie. I can't even give you a log line for it. Just read up on it; it's insane. And we're going to be pairing that with Spike Lee's Bamboozled.
Oh boy!
Which is kind of more in line with something that's happening a little bit with Hi Mom. So we're going to kind of see black artists taking control of the blaxploitation genre on their own terms and kind of making these very witty and interesting satires, especially using the formal qualities of them as well. So we're going to be talking about black artists kind of reclaiming some of those stereotypical images that were coined in the 70s.
So did you say Jason Buford was the guest on that one?
That is, yep.
Awesome, dude. I cannot wait to listen to that.
Yeah, we're going to have an absolute blast. So we're going to get really crazy in the next 2 weeks here. So stay tuned. But yeah, that being said, I think that wraps up for everything this week. Thanks so much, everyone, for listening and for supporting the show and everything that you guys do.
Oh, yeah.
Until then, until next week anyway, keep it sleazy.
Keep it sleazy.